So, good morning, everybody. A warm welcome to Integrated Care Northamptonshire Leadership Matters conversation. Our theme today is about inclusive language and putting people first, and also how language can make a difference to people. So, as I said earlier, my name is Diana Belfon, and I'm the EDI specialist for Integrated Care Northamptonshire. And I will be facilitating the session today. So before we start the session, we just want to do a few housekeeping rules. So what we'd like to do is encourage you to leave your cameras on. It's always wonderful to see those happy, smiling faces. And it's also good for our presenters to see who they're speaking to. So please do leave your cameras on. Now, this is an interactive session, so we welcome and encourage any questions that you may have. Now, you can put your questions in the chat box, but if you're a little bit shy, we will definitely ask the questions on your behalf. Or alternatively, you can raise your hand using the raise hand function. We just would like to remind colleagues that we would like you to be courteous and respectful for everybody that's in the room today. And just a reminder that this session will be recorded for our colleagues who will not be able to join us today. They can watch it on demand. Now, your microphones will be on mute. And the reason for that is we are recording the event and we will try to eliminate any background noises. And please be assured, the presentation shared by our wonderful colleagues today will be available to you at the close of the session. So finally, if you're hard of hearing, just like myself, we do have a transcript button. There are 3 buttons at the top of your screen. If you click on that, you will be able to turn on the transcript. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Tracy Robson. Now, Tracy is our executive sponsor in Northamptonshire for equality, diversity and inclusion. So over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Diana. And Diana is going to be ensuring that the session runs smoothly, but I have the privilege to chair this meeting, one that is particularly passionate and current to my heart right now, which I will come to. I have a day job. I'm the People Director at Northampton General Hospital, so I know some of you on the call, but I don't know all of you. And I really hope that through this presentation, we'll get to some conversation. I suspect we'll have a few more conversations around this topic. Why am I also the SRO for EDI, which I have to say is an absolute privilege. And it doesn't mean I consider myself an expert. What I consider myself is somebody who's particularly passionate about this as a topic. I think it was the reason I was asked. And I'm very lucky to work with Diana, who is consistently teaching me an awful lot in this area. And my job really is to support this as a topic for us at system level, because it is so critical on how we work together, how we treat each other in terms of valuing diversity, embracing it, and really maximising the opportunity that I really believe we have together. But I think we're still very much on a journey, and it's a very broad topic. So the conversation today, I am super excited about. Diana is doing a great job of listening what I would class as kind of bite-sized and hopefully manageable sessions, because we all know we've all got extraordinarily busy jobs, haven't we? But if we could do some of these bite-sized sessions, then looking at the people who've attended today, hopefully that's manageable. But why is inclusive language important? And I've been referencing this in my day job, but also my external world with my family and friends as well. And there's something in the use of language, isn't there? And this is a really important step to help us get on this education journey, to help everybody feel that they've been seen or heard and valued. That's the most important thing. And I think what EDI as a function is doing is starting to open up the culture and starting to enable us to have really meaningful conversations about topics, perhaps, certainly for me, I'll use me as an example, I might be a little uneducated around, because I think we're learning all the time. But by choosing the right language, it just helps us connect, it helps us understand, it helps us be able to reach people perhaps who are a little scared or not sure how to approach, etc. And that's why I think this is really important, because the more inclusive we can be in our language, really simply, the more we can communicate to each other, and that is fundamentally important. And I think, as I say, for me, we're starting this journey, and the team of people who've come here today to do this presentation, thank you so much. I am genuinely excited about learning some things and having some conversations, and maybe even a bit of confidence in maybe asking some of the questions I currently feel a bit unsure around. So whether we like it or not, and I've got two sons who are 21 and 24, and as an old person, as I class myself, I feel I've much to learn, and they are doing a really good job in helping me understand things perhaps I've never even thought about before. So I think a lot of us need to be educated, at least be open to learning. I assume that's why you're here. It's certainly why I'm here. So I'm really excited about the topic that we're about to embark discussing. And I believe I'm handing over to Amika today to introduce the session. I can't see you, so
I'm here.
I'll hand to you now. Over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So my name is Amika Joshi, and I work as the Equality and Engagement Manager at NHFT. This session is about putting people first and how the language we use can make a difference. The topic was put together as a result of a Listening Let's Talk event for LGBTQ+, which was done within the partnership of ICU, where it was found that more learning around inclusive language was required, as people didn't really understand it as much as they would like to, and therefore they were not comfortable with using it. It was therefore agreed collaboratively by all network leads that this session will benefit the learning and understanding.
I think Anamika may have frozen.
Oh,
so what
no.
You're back
again.
now.
Wonderful.
Oh,
Thank
am I
you.
back? Sorry.
I think you're frozen again, Anamika. I think what we'll do now, we'll start the presentation. So, Aaron, would you like to start? Thank you.
Yes. So if we skip forward to the next slide, because Anamika was going to sort of go over some of the ground rules, safe space rules, which we've sort of touched on already. So please remain on mute unless you're contributing. So the four of us that are going to deliver, and then at the end, please ask questions at the end. We encourage it, or put it in the chat as when it comes to you. You can share what you learned today, but please do check with the individuals before mentioning names, just in case it's something they might not want to, I say not share, we're recording this, but you know what I mean. Just make sure that we check that everyone's comfortable first. Come with an open mind, and again, just act professionally throughout. That's all we ask. Next slide, please. So do a very quick round of introductions, and then we'll get straight into it. So my name's Aaron Scott, and I'll give you a full introduction in the next section, which is where I start. If I pass you to Haitch.
I'm Haitch Brackenbury, work for Northampton Children's Trust, and later on I'll give you a full introduction to myself, and I'll pass on to Paul.
Morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Paul Shanley, and I'm a commercial manager at Northampton Children's Trust. And yes, we'll tell you a little bit more about myself later. Alistair.
Morning, everyone. My name is Alistair Weston. I'm Northampton General Hospital's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Engagement Officer.
Excellent. Next slide, please. I love saying that. I feel very sort of, you know, back in COVID times. Next slide, please. I love it. So, hello everyone, and happy Pride Month. As I said, my name is Aaron Scott. I work for Northamptonshire Council. I also chair the LGBTQ+ and ally staff network for both North and West councils. But I also chair an organisation called the Northants LGBT Forum, which we work closely with community groups, organisations, individuals, statutory bodies to really understand the issues facing the LGBTQ+ community in Northamptonshire. We also work with our partners in the West to sort of have a holistic cross-county effect. We take action to ensure that the place we live in is inclusive. So today we'll be going through a few different sections. So what do we mean by inclusive language, my gender and me, and how to be a good ally. So as you know, as I said, we're talking about inclusive language, specifically how it pertains to the LGBTQ+ community, but it reaches much further than just one protected group. So what is it? Why should you care? And the question we get asked all the time is, aren't we all quite inclusive anyway? We're going to start with this really quick activity. It's something we'd normally do on Mentimeter or similar such, but just because we're a bit pressed for time, we've condensed it a little bit today. So I would like you all to note down privately for yourselves what comes to your mind when we mention the term inclusive language. So just write it on a piece of paper, scrap piece of paper, on your laptop, whatever you have access to. And I want you to keep hold of those statements and compare what you've written to your understanding and how you feel at the end of today's session. And the reason we ask you to do this, and the reason we normally do activities like this within the LGBT forum, is because it's so important for our professional development, your professional development, that we get into those habits of tracking our learning and our changes in perception on topics like this. And it'll be really great to refer back to down the line. So like I say, that's going to be a passive activity for you to do in your own time as I'm going through this section. So next slide, please. So what actually is inclusive language? I mean, that's the crux of why we're here, isn't it? So language itself is a very powerful tool. It has more influence on us than we ever give it credit for. And for the majority of us, we don't really consider how certain words can impact on someone else, because often we only consider the dictionary definition of those words. I'll say this now though, throughout our history, words have been used and later removed from public use because of the impact they have. And a lot of language still exists today that has its origins in misogyny and discrimination. Language is something that's constantly evolving, and it's something to be embraced. So simply put, inclusive language is the language and the terminology we use that avoids marginalizing or excluding groups of people based on characteristics. As a tagline, it's as simple as that. It's important in creating a welcoming and inclusive environment, especially in the workplace where people should feel comfortable to be themselves. And while the tagline might be simple, we know that it's not as simple as just saying it. Inclusive language is the consideration of people's lived experiences and how the world treats them. I know for a fact that there are people within our wider system across Northamptonshire who have felt downtrodden and, quite frankly, scared to come out and be themselves in the workplace. And it's not because people are outwardly hostile. It's often because the language used around them makes them question whether it's actually safe to do so. Now, I know this because people have come to me privately in both my roles as staff network chair, but also as chair of the Northants LGBT Forum, to express this fear and ask for advice. It's a real thing in 2023 within our system. Next slide, please. So consider this as we go throughout today's session. Even in 2023, someone who identifies as part of the LGBTQ plus community will typically experience so much hate and ignorance every day, either directly or passively, that they start to hide parts of themselves. And the amount of energy it takes to be someone you're not, it's quite frankly enormous. So when an organization starts to look inward and changes its language, starts using phrases such as parent or guardian rather than mother or father in its forms, or staffing rather than manpower, it has such a huge emotional effect that to the majority of people, you might not barely register it. But for those people that are expending that much energy wondering whether they can be themselves, it's a massive, massive thing. This is inclusive language. It's one small step on a much, much larger journey, but it signals a true commitment to making people of all backgrounds feel included. And when people feel included, valued, and respected, they are more likely to be engaged, productive, and innovative. Remember that. Inclusive language also helps to prevent discrimination, harassment, exclusion, all of which can lead to negative consequences such as low morale, high turnover rates, things that we just don't want to be seeing within the workplace, but also as individuals. Next slide, please. You're seeing more and more as the next generation comes into the workforce that their expectations are higher than ever before when it comes to workplaces being inclusive. For us as a system to be relevant tomorrow, we're going to need to start working today. I would hope that we all want to build an inclusive working environment, regardless of protected characteristics. However, in 2023, it is simply no longer enough to just create a workplace without homophobia, misogyny, racism, etc. We must be looking to create an environment where people feel safe to bring their whole authentic selves. And this starts with making a conscious and deliberate choice in our language. Now, we're not saying you should all go away today and be scared of everything you say, everything you write, or even that every word is taboo. The example I used earlier, mother or father, is absolutely fine in the right context. This is very much a gradual change, but it's something that needs to start today. And as I've already mentioned, it's something that affects everybody, not just those in the LGBTQ plus community. Now, my colleagues, they're going to talk about their lived experiences and some ways to be a good ally based on the various work they've done within their own organisations. But before I finish, I'm going to offer a couple of challenges to you all. So my question for you all, and it's something to take away and think about, how inclusive are your practices really? As an individual, at an organisational level, how inclusive are the questions you ask on your systems? How well in touch are you with people around you? How in touch are you really with them and how they're feeling? Whether they're LGBTQ plus, black, disabled, female, anyone with a protected characteristic. Because findings show that 35% of LGBTQ plus staff have hidden their sexuality at work due to fear of discrimination. And that LGBTQ plus people are more likely to be dissatisfied with their experiences of the health and social care services. Within our own system, we've seen some really poor examples. People who say that they're allies, but then when we have these conversations about modernising our language, get my teeth in, modernising our language, they decry it as snowflake culture. How do you think that feels to someone who overhears that, who might themselves be coming to terms with who they are? We've seen IT systems and equality questions that are just not tailored to the modern world, and an absolute stubborn reluctance to review or update them from not only HR teams, no hate to them, we love HR, but also other leaders all across the system, blaming one thing or another to say why it's not possible. GP surgeries, hospitals and the voluntary sector all stating that we treat everyone the same, and absolutely ignoring the real specific adjustments that need to be made to meet the need of different communities. Inclusive language isn't as simple as not saying one word and using something else. It's a real conscious effort to review how we treat people as individuals and how we work in a way that allows everyone to feel comfortable. If we want to be an integrated care system that is modern, future-proof, and where diversity is celebrated so that everyone truly feels accepted and valued simply for who they are, then we all need to own inclusive language and think about the small yet really significant changes that we can make. I'll finish on this before I pass over. Honestly, last bit from me. Think about how I started this session today with hello everyone, and how I've used inclusive language throughout. It was inclusive, it made sense, and I honestly really hope that it's conveyed the message we were trying to get across. That's it from me for now. Thank you. I'll pass on to, I believe Paul's next.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. If we can move on to the next slide. I've just had a quick look in the chat, actually, and there's some great conversation going on already. And thank you for some people's honesty about not knowing some terminology. I can see you're getting some of the answers in the chat, but hopefully as we go through the presentation, it might confirm things a bit more for some of you as well. So if we could move on to the next slide. So just to say a little bit more about myself, as I said at the beginning, I'm Paul Shanley and I'm a commissioning manager at Northamptonshire Children's Trust, and I also sit on the Children's Trust Equalities Steering Group. So the first photograph you saw of me earlier on was hopefully a bit more trendy than this one. I don't know if you can work out which one is me, but I'm the one on the far left, and then that's my brother, a cousin, and my sister, and that's taken outside my granny's farm quite some time ago. I chose this picture as it hopefully shows perhaps the more flamboyant side of myself in that picture. So the My Gender and Me part of this session that myself and Haitch will be doing is a cut down version that some of colleagues from the Children's Trust may have seen already, that came out of the equalities work at the Children's Trust. It was the first session of further sessions that started off with, as I say, My Gender and Me, talking about gender identity. Then we've done My Age and Me, we've done My Disability and Me, and so on and so on. So it's been a really fantastic launch pad when we started off with the My Gender and Me. Just to say that this is just some research that we did ourselves. We're not formal trainers or anything like that, but hopefully we're going to get the right message across. The next slide, thank you. Haitch.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so I'm Haitch and I work for Northamptonshire Children's Trust as well. I work for Strengthening Families within the SEND team. This is a pretty stereotypical sort of picture of myself wearing a hoodie and a cap. It's very rare that you see me without a cap. I have autism. I'm also transgender. The reason I say that I have autism is because my cap has two reasons behind wearing it. One is for a sensory reason. It helps shield my eyes, but also it gives me a little bit of pressure as well. And wearing a hoodie gives me a little bit of comfort because I can always put the hood up. But yeah, you'll never see me without it. And I'm wearing my favourite football club. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me really. Throughout the presentation, you will hear a little bit about my story as well. And each time I kind of tend to tell a little bit more and surprise everybody because I tend to surprise myself a little bit as well. So if we can have the next slide, please. So now we're going to look at some terminology as we move through the presentation. Next slide, please. So we always begin by looking at sex, and sex is a word that describes someone's biological sex. And as we all know, there are 3 categories. So it's determined by chromosomes, and it physically manifests itself through the bodies. And as I've said, there are 3 categories. There is male, female, and intersex. Now, the male sex is the XY chromosome, and as we know, it obviously displays itself through the male sex organs. And the female is the XX chromosomes, and obviously displays itself by the female sex organs. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. Now, the intersex is displayed through the chromosomes of the XXY or the XXX, and this is an umbrella term for people whose chromosomes and or physical bodies do not fit either male or female. Now, in this country, there's around 1 in 200 babies that are born with an intersex condition, and they include people who look as if they belong to one biological sex but have the sex organs of another. And currently, there is some controversy within the intersex community, as some adults have expressed quite a lot of regret at being assimilated into male or female gender roles, and that decision was actually taken away from them and chosen for them either at birth or when they were young, because obviously the operation was undertaken for them at that time. But opinions remain quite divided on that issue at this moment in time. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So gender. Can we move next slide, please? So gender is split into 2. So gender identity. So gender identity is a person's innate sense of their own gender, whether male, female, or something else, which may or may not correspond to the sex assigned at birth. So may be born male but identify as female, and vice versa, born female and identify as male. This can be described as gender diversity, and it is naturally us. Everyone describes themselves differently, and that's okay. No one can take your gender identity away. It's inherently you. And then there's gender expression. And gender expression is how a person chooses to outwardly express their gender within the context of societal expectations. A person who does not conform to societal expectations of gender may not, however, identify as trans. So, gender expression is how we choose to outwardly express ourselves, how we dress, cut our hair, name ourselves, walk, hold ourselves. So for myself, it's expressed through the name that I chose for myself. So in 2007, I changed my name. I went and changed it by default, much to my parents' disgust initially. The clothing I choose to wear, the fact that I go to the barbers to get my hair cut, which again, my mum's not very happy about or keen on when she happened to come with me because she was a little bit embarrassed. But hey, so if we can go on to the next slide, please. So cisgender or cis is someone whose gender identity is the same as the sex they were assigned at birth. So non-trans is also used. So this means that when you were born and the doctor declared that you were a boy or girl, male or female, they got it right. And basically you still identify as that gender. Non-binary. Non-binary is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity doesn't sit comfortably with man or woman. So non-binary identities are varied and can include people who identify with some aspects of binary identities, while others reject them entirely. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So trans. Trans is an umbrella term to describe people whose gender is not the same as or does not sit comfortably with the sex they were assigned at birth. I'm not going to read out all of the different terminologies purely because you're going to get the slides, but just to pull a few out. So gender fluid is not having a fixed gender. Individuals may identify male one day and female the next. Agender describes a person who does not identify as any particular gender, so has no gender identity and tend to utilize the they/them pronoun. Bigender, denoting or relating to a person whose gender identity encompasses two genders, identifying as both male and female, or as agender and female, but not to be confused with bisexuality, where a person experiences romantic, emotional, or sexual attraction to two genders. Trans man is a transgender person who has transitioned from female to male, or vice versa. So trans woman is a transgender person who has transitioned from male to female. And then neutral, meaning neutral gender or genderless. So if we can move slide forward, please. So transsexual. Transsexual, this was used in the past as more of a medical term, similarly to homosexual, to refer to someone whose gender is not the same as or does not sit comfortably with the sex they were assigned at birth. The term is still used by some, although many people prefer the term trans or transgender. Next slide, please. So gender dysphoria. So gender dysphoria is similar to transgender and describes a sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and gender identity. Now, this is a difficult one to explain. I have gender dysphoria, and the only way I can describe it is I feel male on the inside, but externally I have a female body. So what I see on the outside doesn't match how I feel on the inside, which causes me great distress. So the paragraph here that says the unease felt by the individual can often begin when they are very young and continue into adulthood. For example, a child refusing to wear typical boys and girls clothes. Gender dysphoria causes great distress. It can create depression and low self-esteem and just huge amounts of distress. For me personally, I've had issues trying to get up in the morning. There's been times when I've suffered with depression due to not being able to reconcile how I feel internally with what I see externally and not understanding why this was happening. Triggers can be washing, seeing my body externally, looking at myself in the mirror, hearing my voice, looking at photos, because there's a mismatch between how I feel internally and what I see externally. As I've said, showering and personal care routines are huge triggers. To help with this, people wear chest binders. Chest binders work, but they're uncomfortable and they have to fit perfectly. But there's an issue with chest binders because if you flatten at the top and you have a slight tummy, then your tummy kind of sticks out a bit, which then creates a bit of a body image, a body problem. I was fine about not wearing a chest binder to a certain extent until a few weeks ago at work when I walked in front of a mirror and I hadn't got a binder on and I saw my body and my dysphoria kicked in big time. And literally my self-esteem plummeted at work. So I've had to go back to wearing binders. There is an organisation called Point of Pride that will provide chest binders for young people and adults if they can't afford to get them themselves, if they can prove that they can't get them and they can't afford them. But yeah, so we can go on to the next slide. So although gender dysphoria is not classed as a mental health condition, the feeling can be so intense that the individual can feel trapped within their body that doesn't match their gender identity, and it can lead to a mental health condition, like I said, like low self-esteem, depression, and anxiety. And if you know anybody that you're supporting that has gender dysphoria, then refer them to a GP. Currently, the gender identity clinics, we've obviously got a local one at Daventry to be referred there. You can get referred. However, there is currently a 49 months, so 4 years waiting time. So it's a long wait to be referred at the moment. They are currently seeing patients that were referred in March 2019. Next slide, please. And I think I'm handing over to Paul.
Yeah, thanks very much, Haitch. And that's I've just seen in the chat. Some said thank you for your open and honesty, which I'm sure everybody on the call appreciates. There is a question in there about the difference between dysphoria and dysmorphia, which I'll leave if somebody else can have a think about answering that. So the next couple of slides are some examples of celebrities. We'll use that term perhaps loosely, that we share when we do this presentation for our Children's Trust colleagues. This is just a few of the examples. If we could go on to the next slide, and we'll show you who the first person is. So Sam Smith, been in the news quite a bit recently, so I'm sure many of you know Sam, a pop star. Sam Smith is non-binary and gender queer. Now, I believe a couple of years ago, Sam couldn't be nominated for the Brit Awards, and they just had a new album out, I think, because there was only Best Male or Best Female Artist. So I understand the Brit Awards changed that the next year and just had Best Artist. But then I believe it was just lots of males that got nominated, so didn't quite work out. So just another example of the journey that we're on. The next slide, Harry Styles, very stylish, great shirt there. If you're a One Direction fan, you might remember Harry from there. He's now a global star, a singer and an actor. I've seen them in a couple of films, fantastic. I think they were at Wembley last week. So you might not know this, but Harry is gender fluid. The next person, Cara Delevingne. I think they started off as model, but now they are an actor and a singer as well. Somebody that you might know of, and again that our children and young people at the Children's Trust might identify with. And the next one. Now I'm not a gamer, so I didn't know this person, but Jim Sterling is a video game critic, and they identify as non-binary. So I think that's all of the examples. We're going to the next slide. And I think as we're trying to get across on this session, all those people that we across Integrated Care Northamptonshire provide services to, whether you call that a child or a young person, a family, a client, a patient, whatever words you use, there will be individuals where this is subject to them. Next slide. So we're now going to have a look at pronouns, which I think we're all getting our heads around it a little bit more. And so a pronoun is a word that we use to refer to a person's gender, usually when we're talking about them in conversation. Next slide. There is a video that we sometimes share. It doesn't always work. I'm not going to share that in the interest of time, but when you get this presentation afterwards, you can play a couple of videos. And the next slide. So just a few tips, which once you've seen the video, will back things up for you. The next slide. So a couple of gender neutral pronouns, they, them. Hopefully you've noticed that I used they, them when I was just talking about the previous individuals. There are lots of other different terms that people might use if you want to keep an eye out for them. Another term that we're just bringing to your attention here, instead of somebody might use they, them around their pronouns, is Z. That's just one further example that you might come across. Next slide. So let's have a go at trying to get into the habit of using they, them, if you don't know somebody's pronouns. I'm going to emphasise some words in this. Obviously, in general conversation, you wouldn't emphasise. So there is someone here to see you. I'll ask them to take a seat. Okay, next one. This is Hannah. She works in legal. This is George. They work in Safeguarding North. So there's examples there when you know that somebody's identifies as she and somebody likes to use they. That one. The next one. So have a listen to how somebody might talk about themselves. So from outwardly, they might not look like the gender you think they are. But this is an example of somebody saying, people always say she's interesting when they meet me. So, okay, that person uses the she, her pronouns. And the next one. And why not ask? I think we're getting a bit more comfortable with, if we don't quite know how to pronounce somebody's name, to ask them to repeat it. So, sorry, I didn't catch your pronouns. The next one. Probably most organisations now on this presentation today have started doing this, but if you haven't yet, it's a good idea to start thinking about putting that on your email signature. I know we're certainly doing that here at the Children's Trust, to add your pronouns. The next slide. And let's say we were doing this back in the old days, pre-pandemic, and we were all sitting in a room and we all got a badge. How about putting your pronouns onto your badge as well? Or if it is something that you want to consider doing generally as well. Some conversation examples. I spoke to the service manager and they said they'd get back to me. Or I think someone has left their laptop behind. And as Aaron said at the beginning, hello everyone, hey team, and not hey guys. Now the hey guys thing is very controversial. I had BBC News on this morning as I was getting ready, and guys came up so many times, and I've certainly had conversations with colleagues in the office, female colleagues who are okay with it, but not necessarily everybody is. So let's try and do our best to get out of that hey guys habit. But you might get it wrong, and really don't worry about it as long as we're having a go. It has been suggested that if you are struggling with using the they them pronouns when you know somebody uses those pronouns, do give it a go. But if you might find it easier to use their name, try that as well. But we, I guess, are encouraging that you do try and get into the habit of using the right pronouns. Next slide. And there is actually an International Pronouns Day, which I think is in October. And here's a couple of quotes from that. So using gender neutral pronouns means we don't associate the person we're talking about with their specific gender. And then the next quote, as I've already said, it might take some time getting used to, but it causes you no harm, and using the right pronouns for someone will make them feel valid and acknowledged. The next slide. Yeah, so that's just a summary really. So I hope you found our bit of the session useful, and I'll now hand over.
Brilliant. So I'll take over the next section. So just to move on to the next slide. So a lot of what we've discussed is sort of like the barriers that a lot of the LGBTQ plus community faces when, within their employment, within accessing healthcare, especially across Northamptonshire. One of the key, most important aspects individuals can use to help members of the community is to be a stronger ally. So for us, when we talk about allies, an ally is any person that actively promotes and aspires to advance the culture of inclusion through intentional, positive, and conscious efforts that benefit people as a whole. One of the key aspects of being an ally is that you are from a place of privilege. So you benefit from, how the political social system is built. It benefits you, but you're using your privilege to help those that the system marginalizes. So within the community, what we describe as privilege is coined as straight privilege. So it might be a term you're familiar with, it might be one you're not familiar with. When we mean straight privilege, there are plenty of examples. The strongest examples I like to use is straight privilege is when you as an individual don't really need to check the laws of another country when going on holiday because it doesn't cross your mind that you might be arrested for, being gay. Straight privilege is also you are able to walk down the street and hold your spouse's hand and not have to worry about being violently attacked or harassed in street for just that simple display of affection. So from a place of privilege, you are making a conscious effort to make sure those who feel excluded, who feel small in society, feel better protected. Next slide. So there are quite a few ways you can go about on how to be a good ally. So you got your basics, which a lot of people already, do in terms of in terms of their interactions with people on a day-to-day. So be a good listener, be open-minded, be willing to talk with members from the community as well. But there's also more active steps you can take, especially within like the workplaces, within your social lives. So one of them is be inclusive and invite LGBTQ plus friends to hang out with your friends and family. And Paul has a brilliant example he'd like to share with everyone about his experience with this sort of step.
Yeah, it was more in the workplace, and I have to say, it isn't where I work now. But it wasn't that long ago, and I worked out that my male colleagues were going and playing football once a fortnight on a Monday evening, and then going for a drink, and the female colleagues went out for lunch once a month. I've been there a few months, and I worked all of this out. I didn't get invited to either. So there you go.
So yeah, there's a lot of decisions that, a lot of people tend to not really be inclusive in their approach. So a few others is, don't assume that all colleagues are straight. Anti-LGBTQ plus comments or jokes or banter is harmful. Take the time to reflect on your own prejudices, your own bias, actively research on topics you don't feel like you know a lot about. So if you are worried or confused about pronouns and getting it right, always there are plentiful resources at the end that you can start your journey in terms of researching more information. And one of the key ones we sort of preach as well within the workplace is speak up for LGBTQ plus colleagues who are afraid to do so themselves. Having an ally to have their back when someone's facing discrimination or harassment will go a long way and show that that individual is not alone, especially within the workplace. Next slide. So just some participation for you all. So there are some examples. So first one is, one of your colleagues has informed the team that they are non-binary and use they, them pronouns. In meetings, your manager still uses their previous pronouns, which were she, her. How do you go about dealing with this sort of situation? You're more than welcome to type in your response in the chat box, or if you want to raise your hand or call out how you'd go about it, please do so.
I've actually experienced something like this within Northamptonshire, and the route that I took was I spoke to the manager privately first, and they honestly didn't realise they were doing it, but it was one of those where you could see the person was really being affected by hearing it. So I just reminded, because as an LGBT person myself, you still have to be an ally for other people within the community. So I privately spoke to them to say, do you know you're doing this? And it started to get better for a while. But the takeaway point for me, speaking to that manager, was it's okay to make the mistake, but get in the habit of referring to people in the right way. Because if you keep doing it and keep doing it, it starts to build up and affect people.
Brilliant. And there's a lot of good responses as well in the chat. The key one being it does need to be addressed privately and politely, telling your manager, onto the side that, correcting them on the pronoun uses, even, repeating the sentence and saying the correct pronoun again, making sure you check in with the colleague as well, who's, now subject to being misgendered, making sure they're all right and, have a safe space to escalate any thoughts and feelings they have. And there are some key strength, and one of the key things is making sure that everyone is on the same page and understands where the issue is, so people can take the time to correct them with the right resources and support available. And I believe next example. And then the second one is, you've noticed that a colleague has started eating lunch alone. They have just come out to the team recently as gay, and before that they would be invited by other team members for lunch. What do you do?
It's the issue when you're waiting for people to type, isn't it? There's always that pause. What would Paul, you kind of experienced something not exactly the same, but something similar. So what would you do if you noticed someone in that situation?
Well, I would have a quiet conversation with them about whether they would like to be invited to lunch. Necessarily make a huge thing of it, in front of that person and the rest of the team initially. Well, I'm really worried about the time. I think we should just keep an eye on the chat box and move on. I'm not being too controlling.
Yeah, but everyone hits the nail on the head there, is that, check in with the colleague, make sure they are okay. Our sort of a key one is also to take into account, if you are in a manager position as well, is asking the colleague if you are, if they would mind if you as the manager has a word with the rest of the team to address any sort of bias or issues within the team, as that is a key function within the workplace in terms of managers' levels of responsibility as well. And then I believe next slide. I think I'm passing back over to you, Aaron.
Yeah, so I mentioned in the chat earlier that we've pulled together some resources. Now, there's a lot more out there, but some of these could really help with any further questions you might have that we don't answer today. Selfishly, I've put the LGBT forum at the top, and I'll promote it when you can. But we've got lots of bits on there, and we're continually growing it every day, from information on the flags to community safety advice, tips and help on coming out and pronouns. Stonewall always being a biggie for helping with LGBTQ plus causes. But then there are others as well, sort of talking about supporting your loved ones with their gender identity. The genderbread diagram actually is one that I would steer everyone to, because that is a very good one for explaining the differences between biological sex, gender identity, and everything that Haitch was talking about earlier. I believe that brings us to the end and to any questions we have.
Thank you so much, Aaron, Paul, Haitch, and Alistair. That was incredible, and thank you for being so bold and brave in putting some of your personal experiences, because it is those stories and those experiences that really bring it to life for people. I bet there are so many questions, and I know this is due to to shut at 11:30, but anybody wants to put their hand up. But just to say, because I am one of those people who's sitting here thinking, how do I even embark on that journey? And the stuff that I've written down, I love some of the nuggets that you've given around dismantling language, making a conscious effort, fluency of language so we can connect with people, and the gift of, I didn't catch your pronouns, just as simple as that. And also the most important thing for me as a takeaway, which was, don't be frightened of getting it wrong, because I think there's a lot of that out there, which is why I can imagine another session. I don't know what Diana thinks about, where we might want to come back and have more discussion around this, because there's a lot to take in. But is there anybody who's got a specific question that's desperate to ask? I can't see all the hands. There's a lot in the chat, and I think I'm so excited about this conversation because it's absolutely the one we need to have. And depending on where you are in your organisation, you might be at different places on that journey, and I can hear that from some of the things that Paul and Aaron, etc., have shared. But I do believe the more we can talk about it together, the better we'll get. Are there any hands up, Dana? I can't see, but there are lots of thank yous. You need to read this. Lots of the impact you have had is.
I'd started to like every single one of them, but there are too many.
Me too,
so
Aaron.
thank you.
Love. Yeah.
Thank you from me to all of you as well for joining. I was saying earlier, I had a nightmare that everyone called in sick and I was sat on my own. So actually to see this many people has been lovely.
Yeah. But if there aren't any, there's so much in there. I think potentially we need to capture those, and we can somehow communicate. And we know there's a lot of information out there, but to come here and talk about that between you all, sharing all your different experiences, is just wonderful. So thank you so much. And somebody said there, you know, given where we are, because it does help us, of course, relate to patients who come into our hospitals or whatever your organisation is, connecting people in society, really, isn't it? It's that. I think you can be a little overwhelmed, but this has really given me confidence, I have to say, as somebody in a category that's, where do I even start? I can't tell you the nuggets that I've got even from that to say, okay, there's a couple of things there we can go and practice. I don't want to close it. I want to carry on, because it is so much I want to talk to you about. But let's think about that, Diana, about how we might bring, because I suspect if I was to ask everybody put their hand up who'd like to come back and have more discussion, everybody would put their hand up. So, I
think we've got Heba.
Oh, brilliant.
Kelly and Gabrielle. Can we go with Heba first?
Thank you. I just was about to type, but it's going to take a bit longer. So I would like to ask really questions, and I'm really sorry if I can offend anyone. In our trust, we don't have the unisex toilet. So what toilet really we're going to use? Is there any problem or no problem?
I will pass over to other colleagues as well, but I just wanted to come in on this one because it's something we're talking about within Northants Council as well. And it's quite difficult at the moment when you've got existing infrastructure with closed off areas. There is no simple answer to it. The individual themselves should be allowed to use the one that is comfortable for them, and hopefully we would create a culture where others don't see them as a threat, because they're not a threat. They're using the lavatory. It's not a breeding ground for anything else. But what I would say is, to anyone that's responsible for facilities and anything like that, whenever renovations are being made or things are being changed, consider that. Consider, do you need a space that's just shut off that only males or females can go into? Or do you have, as we've got at William Knibb Centre in Kettering, where you've got a row of individual cubicles? It's not a closed off area. You just go into your own cubicle, lock the door. Think about what you can do to change to make it more inclusive going forward, because I would say it's not something that will change now and overnight. It's a gradual change and something that will take a while, but I don't know if any of my other colleagues have anything they'd like to add to that more specifically for what we do now.
I think it will be a real opportunity if colleagues make sure that they have those conversations in their own organisations with their EDI leads, their HR departments as well. Keep this conversation going. It's been a wonderful learning environment. Thank you for that question, Heba. And I'm sorry we won't be able to take more questions today, but isn't it marvellous that you all are really enthusiastic about this subject, where you want to know more and more. So we've left you and we will leave you wanting more. Now, if you'd like to see further sessions, please email me. My name's Diana Belfon, 1@nhs.net. I put that in the chat. Tell us what more sessions you need to instruct you further. This is all about being inclusive. We don't want to be exclusive. And I'm sure with Tracy's closing remarks today, she's got 6 points that she'd like you to take back with you, reflect and ponder on as we conclude the session. So over to you, Tracy. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, my mouse is a bit slow, but yes, thank you for giving me that opportunity. I mean, there's many things to think about, but in terms of how we might want to think and bring it back to the workplace, because of course that's what we want to do. We want all of our colleagues from all backgrounds and with, you know, whatever pronoun they'd like to reference themselves, to bring their authentic selves to work. That's really important. We want all colleagues to feel they can speak up and feel included. And I think today's session, as we've said, has really helped us think about that and how we might communicate. The importance of using gender pronouns. And if you're not sure, the gift that the team gave us around, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your pronoun. Start getting into the habit of using the pronoun reference. We encourage you to not be a bystander, to call out. Some of the examples are really helpful. I think if you see people making mistakes, I certainly would want somebody to take me to one side and say, did you know you said? That's what it takes to change behaviour and language. And that in itself will start to promote inclusion. Support and embrace difference. I mean, it makes human beings so much more interesting, and we need to celebrate that we're all different and bring the differences and the understanding. And I think a personal comment from me is, I just think we need to be quite patient with each other and understand it. As you say, Aaron, it's going to take time, but until we get on that journey and we start talking about it, then nothing will change, will it? I know there are things like audits you can do. QSpace are really good at that, as an example, and Stonewall probably, of giving you a starting point about checking, you know, how your organisation is right now, if that's something that you wanted to do. But don't forget to talk to each other as well. I've certainly made some new friends on the call today that I might reach out to just, you know, grab a bit of learning and understanding. So thank you all actually for taking the time out of your extraordinarily busy day. Hope that, well, I can see that it has had an impact. So you've done your job, team. And I hope we meet again, talk further. And in the meantime, have a fab day. And Diana, thank you so much for organising this.
Well, thank you to all the presentators today. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to our next session. As Tracy said, have a wonderful day and we'll keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.